This is Your Own Best Company, a podcast for people who love to work alone. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Your Own Best Company. My name is Franklin Taggart, and this podcast is my idea. And I am delighted today to have my very good friend Teresa Funke join us. Teresa and I were talking the other day and having just kind of one of our normal conversations. We get together once a week, and we've been working through Tosha Silver's book, It's Not Your Money, together, just kind of as a fun thing to do. And in our conversation this week, it turned toward her experience of the last couple of years. But before we get into that, we need to let you know what Teresa has been up to in the long run. Teresa started out her writing career as a freelance writer, and quickly realized that one of the things that she really wanted to do was to be an author. And she started on the path of writing historical novels, primarily about World War II, and it was novels for both young people and for older people. And was it 7 novels altogether that were in the World War II novels, series?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And the one that I can speak to from experience is Dancing with Combat Boots. Mm-hmm. It is a collection of stories that I find very endearing, but also very revealing of the more personal aspects and the more personal impacts of the war on people. And the other book that I want to mention is one that the last time that Teresa was on my podcast, and it was the old podcast, the Reset podcast, we talked about her book, Bursts of Brilliance for a Creative Life. Now, this is one of the must-reads that I share with all of my clients. It is particularly relevant to people who want to have just a more creative experience of life. It's not necessarily that you're going to go out and be a professional artist or anything like that. That could happen, but it's just if you want to get more creative juice out of life, this book is one that I've recommended to a lot of folks. And that came out, what was it, 2 years ago, or is it now 3?
Yeah, 2019, fall of 2019. Yeah.
That time has flown by. But in the last couple of years, one of the things that I really admire about Teresa is that she's so entrepreneurial, and she finds ways to get her books into readers' hands that are really outside of the box thinking. And she does a lot of projects working with schools. She does a lot of projects. One last year, the year before, was targeting getting books into the hands of students at Native American schools on reservations and in their communities. And it's just, she's always got an idea. Well, the last couple of years, that Teresa has been through kind of a transformation.
Exactly.
And I'm going to let her tell you what she's been up to for the last couple of years, because I really feel like that she can tell the story better than I can. But I'm just so glad that you're with me this morning, Teresa. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Franklin. I'm really excited to be here today. I'm going to be talking about my sabbatical, which for me is a bit of a vulnerable place to be talking. I speak on podcasts all the time, but to talk about a sabbatical is something different for somebody who has always had a very, very strong work ethic. I was raised by 2 parents who were sort of defined by their work ethics. My dad was a businessman, and his work was everything to him in that sense of identity, And my mother was a teacher, and she would move mountains for her students and for her teaching. Her work ethic was incredibly strong. And so that's how I was raised, and I've always been a hard worker, and I've always been somebody who's been a bit of a rebel in terms of my work. And, having been told when I was younger, I actually wanted to be an author from the time I was in the 5th grade. And then all through, junior high and high school, got a lot of encouragement. And then you become a senior and people are like, well, that's not a job. That's a hobby. And that rebellious side of me kicked in and said, well, who said it's not a job? And so I started a freelance writing business, not really knowing what that was. and quickly figured that out. And then I did write my 7 historical fiction novels about World War II. And so there was a period of time a few years ago when the assistant I had at the time came into my office and she said, "Did you know we're juggling 18 different projects?" And I said, "No, we're not. We're not." And then she showed me the list, and we were. So that's how hard I worked for a long time. And at the same time, raising 3 children and, being very involved in my community. And so I loved it. I loved being busy. I loved all the work I was doing. I was mainly an author, a speaker, and a writing coach, and busy all the time. And then in January of 2020, I started to have this weird feeling as it turned into the new year of, wow, I'm not sure I really want to do some of these things I've been doing for a long time that I'm really, really good at. And I started to have that inkling of a feeling, but I pushed it to the back of my mind because I was too busy. And then the pandemic hit a few months later. And within a week, all 3 of my revenue streams shut down. So book sales, speaking, and coaching. And they shut down within a week. And so all of a sudden I threw myself into this pivot. Remember that word, pivot?
I hate that word.
Me too. Of trying to figure out, well, what are you going to do next? How are you going to make this work? And I got very involved in transferring my school visits, for example, over to a virtual program for the schools. And that continued for a while, where I was just kind of going through the motions, but still feeling not like myself at all. Really, the pandemic threw me for quite a loop. And then that caught up to me in June of 2021, when not only was I experiencing what I now understand was a bit of burnout with my work, but also I had a medical scare that just terrified me. And I had a family concern. And they all kind of hit at the same time. And I realized I need a break. I can't handle this kind of pressure anymore. I was experiencing a little bit of depression that I didn't want to admit was depression, because I'm an optimistic, hardworking, enthusiastic, creative person. And I didn't want to admit that. And I realized I needed a break. And so that was the June of 2021. And I said to myself, okay, what do I call this? Like, I don't want to tell people I'm quitting, although I did quit some aspects of my work. I had been working to shut down my coaching, my writer's coaching side of my business, and I did that officially in June of last year. But I don't want to say I'm quitting, because that sounds too permanent. And I don't want to call it a gap year, because that sounds sort of kind of flippant and fun, like you're going to go travel Europe for a year and find yourself. And it wasn't really that. And I didn't want to call it a break, because a break was too undefined, and people were going to ask me all kinds of questions. Well, what kind of a break? And how long is your break? And what are you going to do on your break? And so then I landed on the word sabbatical. And I thought, oh, what an awesome word, because you know what? The word sabbatical is productive, and it's positive, because usually when people go on sabbatical, they are going to go do some deep research, or they're going to write a book or something. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be productive, and I'm going to go do deep inner work. And I'm going to figure out this health issue, which actually turned out, thank God, to be nothing. And I'm going to go into myself, and I'm going to meditate more, and I'm going to calm myself down, and I'm going to fix this anxiety and this depression that I'm feeling, and I'm going to get better. And that's what sabbatical seemed to be. It's like this productive word for a break. And I said, my sabbatical will go from the end of June to the end of December, 6 months, just like, a college professor. And then I'll have it all figured out.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And then what happened?
Then what happened exactly? Well, about 4.5 months into my sabbatical, and people did respond really well to that word. Oh, a sabbatical. Oh, that's wonderful. What are you going to do on your sabbatical? About 4.5 months into my sabbatical, I wrote a blog post called "I Am Failing at My Sabbatical." Because I realized that sabbatical comes from the word Sabbath, which means rest. And I had spent the past 4.5 months not feeling restful at all, but feeling really guilty that I wasn't working, feeling ashamed of myself that I was being, quote, lazy, feeling annoyed that I couldn't figure this out. Like, where's my creativity? Why can't I figure out how I'm supposed to move forward? and just putting so much pressure on this sabbatical, which means rest, and just had a big turnaround and said, nope, this is not what this is supposed to be. And so for the next, I said, we're closing in on the end of the year. Between now and my deadline of December 31st, I'm just going to relax. I'm just going to ease into this more. And I did. But then ironically, December 31st came and went, and no lightning bolt, no, oh my God, I figured it all out. So my daughter said, well, what are you going to tell people now? And I said, I'm going to say I'm on extended sabbatical. And so that's where I am right now. I'm kind of happily on this extended sabbatical, still figuring it out, still trying to be at ease with that.
It's like not quite retirement, right?
Yes, exactly.
But the thing that strikes me is interesting with your story, it feels like to me that you're not alone in this desire for deeper rest. A lot of people that I've talked to have had that same kind of desire, and some of them have actually acted on it. And I know that just having this, this period of upheaval socially for all of us has been something that I think naturally creates a reframe. As things started to shut down for you, were there things that you realized that you didn't miss?
Yeah, there were. There were several things I realized I didn't miss, and they were things that I was really good at. And that was the part that surprised me the most, is that they were things I'd been praised for and things I had done well, and I did not miss them when the shutdown came, and it was a relief. Even though it was a relief not to have to do them. And what I think was the biggest relief of all was in the evenings, at the very end of my day, like I didn't used to allow myself to sit down and close out my day till 10 o'clock at night. And then I would say, okay, I'm going to read my novel, I'm going to watch some TV, and then I'm going to go to bed. But I used to sit on the couch at 10 o'clock at night and just be running through in my head everything I had done that day, everything that didn't get done, everything I still had to do tomorrow, looking ahead to the week. Sometimes I'd get off the couch and go send another email. And what surprised me the most that I did not miss during the pandemic when things shut down was that moment of just being able to sit on the couch and say, I don't have to think about anything, And I did get a couple of things done today, which was, I feel good about that, but I don't have to run this rat race in my head. And that was tremendously freeing and relaxing. And I was like, I want to hold on to this. I do not want to go back to being that person who can't relax at the end of the day. So I think that was probably the biggest shift for me in terms of things having shut down.
Just finding that the slower pace was actually something that had a benefit to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, a health benefit and helping, you sleep better, you sleep more. I started sleeping a little more than I had been before. And that was all very restful and rejuvenating,
How did this affect your identity?
Oh, tremendously. It was embarrassing, to tell people that I was on a sabbatical. And I think you have to be really careful who you talk to about it in the beginning, because some well-intentioned friends would respond by saying, oh, no, you can't stop doing that. You're so good at it. Or there'd be that sort of pressure of people saying, it's a gift. I wish I could do what you do. Don't stop. Like you have an obligation to this gift of yours. And, other people just, again, in a well-intentioned manner, trying to say to you, don't quit, don't stop, don't slow down. You're a powerhouse. You've always been so inspiring to me. And I'm like, well, if I stop, I'm not inspiring anymore. So it very much affected my identity of being this person who was a hard worker and a coach and somebody who inspires others. And I thought, has that changed? Am I now somebody who's somewhat kind of selfish, just doing for myself? And I understand that a sabbatical is a place of privilege. Like I'm at a stage in my life when my children are grown, our parents are in good health, my husband has a good job. This is a privilege to be able to take time off of work. I'd built up some reserves in my business, so I'm able to do this now. There were times in my life I could not have pulled back the way I'm doing now. So I understand that not everyone can do a full sabbatical the way I have, and that it is a privilege. And so that was kind of embarrassing too, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
As far as like when people see you kind of living outside of the roles that they have come to expect, it always amazes me that people only have room for one idea of who you are in their mind. And if you show up outside of that idea, it's so uncomfortable, you know.
It's true, yeah. Especially when you've been doing something for a long time. Like I've been an author and a writer for 30 years.
Yeah.
And so people will, especially when you're somebody who's in the arts, people will say, well, artists never retire. I mean, that's the beauty of being a writer. You could write till you're 90. And you're like, well, you wouldn't tell a dentist that. Like, that's a lot of pressure to put on those of us in the arts.
Yeah, if you can write till 90 if you want to. I mean, especially if you got started when you were 80. What are the things that you'll never go back to?
Oh, that's a great question. Maybe I've even been avoiding thinking about that, because there's a part of me that doesn't want to think of something as being over. I understood that my World War II books are somewhat over because all of my books are based on real people that I interview, and they're literally all passing away. So I kind of understood that, and I think that was part of the original shift of what do I do now. So I think that there were some things that kind of came to a natural conclusion, and other things that I probably do need to let go of, but I'm not quite ready to yet. So I think that's part of the point of this sabbatical, was getting to a place where you could feel at ease with the decisions to let something go. And it isn't something necessarily that you can just do overnight. Like, it's taken me months to get to that space with some of the projects I'm doing. And you notice I'm not naming any particular projects, because knowing me, I'll get a resurgence of energy and I'll rebuild them in a new way, and then they'll be back. So, but yeah, I am a little surprised how long it has taken me to sort of answer that question. Months of working on that very question.
It's like never say never, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm wondering though, the thing that strikes me as interesting about your story is that this was an unintentional movement. I mean, it kind of happened by accident, and then you realized that you were calling it something, and it's like it was mostly by circumstances. But if you had to go back, let's say that you had the option of actually planning a sabbatical, would you do anything different?
Oh, well, that's a really great question, too. Yeah, it didn't feel planned, although it feels now like it was inevitable. Of course, if I had planned a sabbatical, I would have planned it, I would go live somewhere else for 6 months. Well, you can't do that during a pandemic, right?
Right.
I think a planned sabbatical to me would have felt a lot different, in that I would have probably spun it around some kind of a project or some sort of a goal, an objective of some kind. And this was the opposite of that. This was trying to embrace just being present, just be. And for me, that was super, super difficult, always has been. So it was kind of the opposite of how I would have structured a sabbatical before, which, like I said, would have been very productive. And that was even how I was thinking of the word. But it wasn't about that. It was about learning how to let go and just be, which, oh my gosh, that was so hard for me. Like, it's funny because people say, well, aren't you lucky you've been taking a sabbatical? And I will look them in the eye and say, honestly, this is the hardest thing I've ever done. Giving myself permission to have 6 months to just be, ironically, is the hardest thing I've ever done.
Yeah. Now, I know that you're a big Enneagram fan, and you're a 7, and being is a hard thing for 7s, right?
Oh yes, we have a very hard time being in the present moment. It's work, and it's necessary work. And I think one of my goals for the for my time in the sabbatical was to meditate more. I've always struggled with meditation, and I was doing it maybe 3 times a week. And I wanted to try to get to a point where I was doing it every day. I'm still not quite there, but just honoring that space, which to me used to feel like, wasting time for half an hour, or and now understanding how critical it is to my health. Like the meditation, it was the thing that probably the most helped bring down the anxiety and the depression that I was feeling. I'd never experienced anxiety before in my life until the pandemic, and so that was a weird, strange place for me to be. Stress, yes, I understood stress, but anxiety was different. So yeah, I kind of knew I had to do that, but it was, that's hard for me too. Something like meditation is really hard for a 7.
Yeah, and just doing nothing is hard.
Yeah.
How have you seen your decision to take this time off? How has it impacted your family?
Oh, that's a great question too. My husband like I said, he has a great job. He works for a Fortune 500 company, and so he's working from home. So he's been right here in the midst of it with me. He comes down for his lunch break, and here's, this is typical of me. Here's my sabbatical, but I have spent it watching courses and webinars and reading books and doing all this intense inner work. And, he comes home at his lunch hour, and I'm like explaining to him what I just learned about doership and how I've always been a doer and I need to stop that, or what I just read about detachment or non-grasping. And he's just looking at me like, what are we talking about? So he's been sort of in the midst of this transformation and very supportive of that. My kids are grown, as I said, and so that's been a relief because they finally got to a place where they were somewhat settled, and it allowed me some space to focus on myself, where you didn't have to be, even grown children are a lot of work, as most parents know, and they finally settled, and that was helpful to me too. Mm-hmm.
Have they had to make adjustments to this?
I don't think 2 of my children are that concerned. My one daughter has been super interested in what I'm going through, and we talk a lot. And I think there are moments where she was concerned, for sure. Like, you don't sound like yourself. Are you okay? But also very intrigued with what I was going through and really responsive and supportive. And so that's been really helpful to know that you could be vulnerable in front of your children when you'd always been the strong one, the one with all the answers, that you could be vulnerable in front of your children is kind of it's a special thing. Like, I feel really grateful for that shift in our relationship now.
That's one of the things that kind of naturally leads into the next question that I have. In our conversation the other day, you were talking about how you had kind of hoped to have some answers emerge, and you've actually kind of come to a place of being okay without having the answers. And can you talk about how you got to that place?
Well, it started to occur to me that grasping concept of just grasping for the answers wasn't working, that beating myself up for not having the answers yet wasn't productive. And I had to sort of just relax into and let go and just sort of, instead of, grasping with your fist and trying to hold on to something, you open your fist and you let things come to you. And that was hard and is still hard, but it just felt so necessary. And so I am much more at peace with that now than I was when I started. Like I said, this was at least the first 4.5 months of the sabbatical, I was doing everything all wrong. And it is still a bit of a struggle for me. And I'm not there yet. I'm here that was the end of June, and this is the end of February. But I feel much closer, and I feel much more at peace, and I feel much more attuned to, at my core, what I want and who I am. I still don't know what my goals and objectives are, and that's okay. It's like, it's really unusual to be okay without having something driving me. That's very different for me.
Yeah. the lesson about grasping is the one that really catches my attention, because I feel like so many of us do that. And we grasp intellectually and we grasp emotionally, and we just constantly search for ideas and opportunities and things that we need to do. And that habit is not an easy one to set aside. And it almost feels like that it took that for you. It took this sabbatical being foisted upon you
Mm-hmm.
to make you realize that.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, I was operating fine. Like in that January of 2020, I had this inkling. I had an awareness. My intuition and my body were trying to tell me something, and I wasn't listening. And, like the pandemic sort of forced that in a way, but then that created a whole different set of challenges and stresses and worries that turned into this anxiety and this depression, and so that just added on. But this came before that. Like my body and my intuition were telling me that something was off, and you would not have thought that to see me in January of 2020. I looked like nothing but a success story.
Well,
And
yeah, the book had just come out. The Burst of Brilliance had just come out.
yeah,
You were still kind of riding that wave.
mm-hmm.
And yeah, wow. It's almost a stark difference.
It was very, yeah. I mean, like I said, if you'd known me in January of 2020, you would have seen somebody who was very busy, lots of different projects going on, speaking and doing school visits and teaching classes, and still working with a couple of clients that I was finishing up their books and that sort of thing. And it was all really rewarding work. And like I said, I was very, very good at it. And so you were kind of riding the high of people saying, wow, you've got such great gifts and talents. And yet there was this voice in the back of my head that said, something's not right. I don't think I want to do this. And then there was another voice saying, that's crazy. You took a long time to build this up. This is something you're really good at. It's crazy to think that. And I would just push those thoughts aside, literally push them aside.
Yeah. I think that projection of that you have this gift, you should be using it. I think there's something about that that's kind of unforgiving and actually really kind of passive aggressive, judgmental kind of a thing, right?
Yeah.
It's like they're pushing judgment on you for not acting on your gift.
Mm-hmm.
What I wonder is if your gift is being given a new, like maybe a new wrapper. The thing that I've always looked at is that I think it's really important not to confuse gift and talent. And the thing that I really marvel at, it's like the books of yours that I've read, I've loved. They're wonderful, and I've followed your blog for longer than I've known you, and that's also a wonderful piece of self-expression. But in getting to know you, the thing that's really striking to me is that, if I were to just say that your gift is writing and that's what you should do all the time, I'd be selling you short, first of all, and second of all, I would be putting you in a box that actually your gift is much bigger than. And I think people need to understand that your gift is much bigger than just being a writer. So I'm just going to get off my soapbox here, but I really feel like that way of understanding gifts and talents needs to be corrected, because you are so multi-talented, and you're talented in business, you're talented in communication, you're talented in so many areas, but your gift, the inspiration comes through, in 150 ways.
I love that concept you have, and that was a game changer for me when you explained to me a while back that there's a difference between our gifts and our talents. And you said, you have many talents. You're a great speaker. You're great at building things and being an entrepreneur and even marketing. And but that your gift is that you make people feel like they can do anything, and that's what you told me. And I was like, wow, that's kind of, yes, across the board, everything I do comes back to that message. So what does that say about me if I stop working and I'm not out there inspiring people? I'm just in my own house meditating and watching courses on the Enneagram. I'm not inspiring people. Like, am I throwing away my gift? And then I realized, my gift is going to go deeper because of this time that I gave myself. I'm going to learn so much more that I can have to give. Like, I feel like this is very much not just a service to myself, but hopefully it will be a service to others when I figure out the new direction that I'm going to take, because I've learned so much. And I hope it is inspiring in some way for some people to hear that it's okay to take a break, and it's okay to shift gears, and it's okay to just be. And I hope there's some inspiration in that as well. So yeah, that when you talk about identity, I'm the person who's supposed to inspire people. And if you look at my blog, it's really fascinating. My blog's an inspirational blog called Bursts of Brilliance for Creative Life. And it has shifted. There was a tone that shifted when the pandemic began. There was a tone that shifted when I went into sort of anxiety and depression. It was still very inspirational, but very raw and vulnerable, and people responded to that. And then it shifted back again as I started to come to this new phase of the sabbatical into being a lighter, more energetic, and people have really responded to that. So I think being true to myself and that vulnerability is more inspiring than I was giving credit to.
The growth that has come through on your blog posts of watching your process unfold, the thing that I think is going to be really interesting for people to absorb from that is not one article, but it's the whole experience of going through that with you, of going through that. What in the world am I doing? Why does it feel this way? I should be on a high right now and I'm not. And then going through that self-exploration, I think going through that journey with you is going to be of really high value to the people who engage with that. I'm going to encourage people to check out the blog, because I think it's a fantastic resource for anybody who's creative. But that longer story, I think, is really important for people to hear and grasp.
Yeah. And what's interesting about the blog is that it did start out with, my intention was that I was writing the blog for artists and entrepreneurs. And then I started to figure out that teachers were reading the blog, and healthcare professionals and business people. And I was like, what? And of course, I should have expected that, because everyone's creative, everyone. I was a stay-at-home mom for a lot of years, and there's a lot of creativity in that. So yeah, I think that, the creativity aspect of it has remained in the blog. The inspirational aspect has remained in the blog, but what you've seen is me journeying through the ebbs and flows of my energy as this pandemic has, continued longer than any of us wanted it to, as there were changes in my personal life and my health. It's like there's a real vulnerability to that comes across in the blog that I think people can relate to and appreciate.
Yeah, I'll agree with that, definitely. I'm not going to ask you what's next, because we really don't know. Right?
Yes, thank you for not asking me that. I've been answering that question for 30 years. Oh, what's next for you, Teresa? And I tell them about the next book or a project I'm working on. And yeah, right now is what's next is, Teresa 2.0, whatever that looks like.
Well, I have to just say that I've been enjoying going through that Tosha Silver book together. I had read it before just on my own, but it's really fun to go through it with another person and hear your reflections as you're going through it.
Yeah.
What are some other jewels that you found that you might recommend to other people during this time?
In terms of resources?
Resources or just surprises? What are some things that you were surprised by?
I think, well, one, I've always been somebody who's just been if you look at StrengthsFinder, I have input. If you look over here, I have Maven. At the Spark test, I have Maven. I'm a learner. I'm somebody who's always likes to learn, and I'm very curious. And so having this opportunity to spend more time, doing courses and webinars and taking a creativity class, which is funny. I've been a creative for 30 years. So why would I need to take a creativity class? and just taking what you can from each of those things, and you start to piece things together. And there's a little bit over here that really resonates with you, and there's a little bit over here. Rereading books is something I've never had time to do. And I read The Power of Now, and then a couple months later I read it again, slowly. It's sinking in the pieces. Same thing with It's Not Your Money, which you and I'd read it in the fall, and now you and I are reading it together. You get something totally different each time you read it. What a blessing to have the time to reread something and go deeper into that knowledge. And so, yeah, absolutely. I think that has been it. And I think probably the biggest takeaway and my best quote advice that I would give, because everybody's going to have to do this their own way. And if you can't take a full sabbatical right now, can you look and see, is there something in your life that's causing you stress that you could take a break from? And even if that's just something that seems positive, like your intention to run a marathon this year, but now it's causing you stress because you don't really have the time to train and there's something wrong with your foot and you're going to power through it because you set that goal. What can you look at what is causing you some stress and anxiety and discomfort and dis-ease in your life and see, can you take a sabbatical from that? But I think my biggest advice would be to just learn to trust. That's been the hardest part for me, is just trust that your intuition is calling you to this for a reason, and trust that your higher self can handle this, that it wants this. Trust that the universe or the divine or whatever you call it has got your back and will see you through this, and that the people in your life will show up for you. I've been so impressed with how my friends, including you, have shown up for me through this process. And so that trust piece is really hard for someone like me who's a doer and a go-getter and a hard worker. But it's so critical. And I have to tell myself that every day, just trust that you're where you need to be. It's hard, but it works.
What it feels like to me, as an observer, it feels like to me that you're being prepared for something. And you had we've talked before about that you felt like that burst of brilliance, the book was kind of a preparational step for you. But it feels like to me that there's a greater message even than that's bubbling up. We don't know what it is yet, but I think with patience we're going to discover it, and we're all going to be blown away.
I hope so. I love being blown away. I'm excited for that.
I'm excited for it too. It'll be interesting to see it come into being. So I'm excited to be an observer in that.
Yes. And thank you for the opportunity to talk about this, because like I said, when you first asked me if I would talk about the sabbatical on this podcast, I was like, oh, I don't know. There was still that hesitance in me of, you don't want to be judged. You don't want to be, and there's several layers of judgment, that could come into place. So I'm really happy to have had this opportunity to share what I've been through, because I think a lot of people, I think there's a reason for the Great Resignation. I think there's a reason for the higher numbers of depression and concern. I think we need a reset, as a community and a culture as well. And I think hopefully if some of us show that it's okay to do that and that it's allowed and you'll survive it and you'll come out better on the other end, that maybe that's helpful.
Sure. I believe it. I think that there's so much positive that's coming out of this. I can say for myself that there is definitely, and I've witnessed it in other people, including you. I think what we need to do, Teresa, is have our own podcast.
Yep.
I think it would be fun. I mean, we could talk about anything. It's like it doesn't have to be about. It could be like Seinfeld, a show about nothing. It'll still be fun, right?
There was a reason that show worked, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's like I wasn't going to it with any really, hard set expectations except to see what they were up to. Right. But I do want to remind people, Bursts of Brilliance for a Creative Life is still out and available. You can find it burstofbrilliance.com. And also make sure that you visit the blog and subscribe to that as well, wherever you wherever you take in blogs. I know that Feedly is still a thing. Do you use a blog reader?
I have an RSS feed attached to the blog, but I don't even know where it goes anymore. I do have people who have subscribed to the blog. A lot of people find the blog through my social media because I'm on everything. I'm on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and Pinterest and YouTube and all kinds of stuff. And a lot of people find the blog through that. In fact, they kind of wait for me to post on social media when the new blog is up, and then they skip over and they read it from there. So, which is great. And, my blog posts are not long, and that's intentional. It's a burst of brilliance, right? It's to encourage your bursts of brilliance. And so I think it's fun. It's fun to write something, the thinking with blogs now is, they must be longer and they must have all this intense content, and the longer people read, the more, higher up you go in the algorithms. And I don't care. What I care about is that people get that burst of inspiration that just lifts them up for the day. And that's what's more important to me.
You were successful in that, and I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for being my guest, and I'll look forward to the next time that we get a chance to sit down and talk.
Thank you. Thank you, Franklin. This has been wonderful.
My pleasure. Thanks for listening to Your Own Best Company. If you enjoyed the show, would you do me a favor and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast host? If you really love it, leave me a review or share it with your circles. If you feel like your career is reaching a dead end, or you're feeling a deep sense of dissatisfaction in your work right now, I help people discover their gifts and then find or create new opportunities that are the best fit for their talent, experience, and lifestyle. Email me at coaching@franklintaggart.com for more information. I also help people start, finish, and launch creative projects, and I offer an ongoing marketing mastermind for solopreneurs and freelancers. More information on these programs and services can be found at franklintaggart.com. Thanks again for spending this time with me.